Heyo, welcome everyone to episode 39 of Today in the Scene. I'm Joe with Indie Arcade Wave, and this is my co-host Dylan from Galactic Battleground.
Hey y'all, what's up?
This week we will be diving into an indie that some of you are probably familiar with at this point. I know we spoke to Dan at DSM Arcade about it, and that's called Switch and Shoot. So this awesome game is a one-button shoot 'em up that is very difficult and addictive. It was very hard for me in the arcade in the beginning, and I've kind of started to figure it out on the PC, so you should try it out. But with us today is the creator Matt Glanville. How you doing today, Matt?
Hello, I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad we finally got everything set up. We've been talking for a little while. I just want to remind everybody that if you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to subscribe and share the videos. Let your friends know about them, other devs, stuff like that. We just want to spread this, help the community grow, and help new developers get into developing. So, with that, Matt, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do, so that the viewers kind of know a little more about you.
Yeah. So I'm a solo indie developer. I'm based in the UK in Leeds, and so I basically spend full time making games. I've released three full commercial games so far. Released a bunch of other games in the past. But yeah, that's my thing. I spend as much time as I possibly can making games on my own. I have a little bit of help here and there, but it's mostly me doing the pixel art and the programming and the game design and animation and plugging in any sounds or music I can find. Um, that's my thing.
Awesome. On the lines of you making video games, when did you get involved with video games, and what were your earliest memories?
When oh man, it's hard to remember exactly when, but let me think. It was definitely around sort of the mid 90s. So I was born in '84, so when I was maybe about 11, 12, around that kind of time, I was playing stuff like StarCraft. The first StarCraft came out, and Half-Life. And back then, it was kind of really common for PC games to come with level editors. So that was always something that really appealed to me. That I just thought like that's so cool. I could be making my own games or like in my own levels for games. So I'd often buy these games sort of on the basis of being able to make stuff for them, and that's how I really got stuck into it. So yeah, Half Life, StarCraft, that kind of stuff, and then soon after that, I was playing a lot of JRPGs like Final Fantasy VII and Suikoden, Breath of Fire 3, those kind of games, and I came across RPG Maker 2000. Actually, I think RPG Maker 95 I first started on, but it was way harder to use. So moved over to 2000 when I found that, and there was this really vibrant community back then. So this is jumping ahead a little bit to like around the year 2000, and I just got completely sucked into this world of making JRPGs, or Japanese styled 16-bit kind of games. Um, Ended up making a trilogy of games called Legion Saga, which were, um, I guess, fairly well known in the community at the time. Um, and I guess by that point, I was hooked. It was like this is this is what I love doing. Couldn't stop. Never did stop. um, so that was like my entry, I guess. Um, Eventually, that moved on to. I spent a while not really knowing kind of what I wanted to do in life, as a career, as I'm sure a lot of people do.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, it never really occurred to me that making games was a career for people. It was just like I like making games as a hobby, and I like playing games. But um, back then, developers were to some extent invisible. At least, definitely compared to what it is like now. You don't, nowadays you can kind of reach out and speak to developers within, you know, before you've ever even played their games. You might have spoken to them on Twitter or whatever, but back then it was just you didn't really know the developers at all. At least not. At least I didn't. You know, as a kind of young adult. So I spent a while not really knowing what I wanted to do, and eventually, kind of gradually came to this conclusion or this realization that a career in games is possible. That's a thing that people do. So I started making steps to making that my career, my kind of that became my goal in life. Really, then was to get into the industry, which I did around 2000. Well, in 2010, I started working at EA down in Guildford in England. Worked on a few games there. Worked at a bunch of other studios. Eventually got a job working on Oddworld's New and Tasty, which was a pretty big deal for me, being a fan of the original game, Abe's Odyssey. So and that was a huge kind of milestone in my career, I'd say, because I had a pretty hands-on role, being the only designer on the project. I had to, touch everything in the game to some extent. I had a hand in every part of it, so I got to really see how every part of the machine was working. So that was a huge moment, and not long after that is actually when I came up with Switch and Shoot. So that was like, in a nutshell, my kind of history through the industry, I guess, and getting me to the stage I'm in now.
Super rad.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, and that's really cool that you took kind of like the traditional route. I guess the way that it works now is a lot different. I mean, you can be a 15-year-old kid in your basement who's developing games and just throw it up on Steam, and now you're a developer.
Right.
And you have social media to reach out to people and find people that like the game. But back then, you had to go through a studio, really, unless you had a backer.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's a really good point.
I was sort of getting into it around the whole time that like indie games were becoming a thing, and stuff like Kickstarter was relatively unheard of at this point. And I think the general consensus was like, it's the only option is really to go and work in a studio, and gradually you start to get this buzz of like people thinking, well, I could do this myself, like I've got the know-how to do it. I've got a group of people who want to do something similar. Like, you started to see little groups kind of peeling off from the bigger studios and doing their own thing, which is pretty exciting time, I remember.
Right, and I mean, so many of these indie games came out of groups that were already at a big studio, and they just kind of
Yeah,
worked on it as a side project, and they were like, "Let's just make our own studio." Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so I guess that kind of leads into what I was curious about next, which is what did the development of Switch and Shoot look like? Where did you draw inspiration? And I just want you to kind of tell us the story of how it came to be.
Sure. Yeah. What did the development look like? It was a lot of lunch breaks, evenings, and weekends, because I was still working a full-time job at the time. So it was made in like 1 to 3 hour bursts, as much as I could. Um, I think it started when I was just messing around with the mechanic, like that idea for like a ship. Well, it wasn't even a ship; it was just like something moving across the screen, and every time you press the button, it flips directions, and shoots at the same time. Like that just like distilled little nugget of gameplay, or that one mechanic just kind of popped into my head one day. Which is like, really, like, if you played the game, it's kind of that is the game for the most part. Like, there's not a whole lot else wrapped around it, but like, I kind of realized quite quickly that works really well, and so I stuck with that. So really, it was just a case of like layering things on top of it and seeing like what else I could add. And as I say, like at the start, I I didn't even intend for it to be a shmup. I didn't intend for it to be like kind of this retro arcade themed game at all. Like all of that just kind of naturally emerged from what it was and what it felt like to play. Just this idea of like moving across the bottom of the screen, and it's like, okay, well, like makes sense for things to come down. Makes sense for the screen to be vertical because then you've got less. You can't just kind of go on forever horizontally. You've got to like think really carefully about where you're positioned. And then it was like, okay, well, what could I do as one person with limited artistic experience? I can't do like elaborate 3D models and complex animation or anything like that. So I could do like some pixel art. Might be quite cool to just make it black and white. Originally, it was just black and white. There was no other colors, and then I started to like layer in a few more colors there. So it's got like yellow for the power ups, red for the aliens, blue for the shields. All this stuff just kind of emerged as I was tinkering and seeing what worked and what didn't, and all the time thinking about what I could do with my limited resources. So yeah, that was working on that was like just in my spare time. I didn't have plans for it to be commercial or anything like that. I actually left it kind of sat on a shelf for a good number of months after I made the original sort of prototype, I guess. It was just like a fun little prototype, and then a friend of mine was running an event or working at an event, and it was a private party, I believe, but they had like a kind of arcade themed zone at this event, and they wanted just like a random mishmash of any kind of little simple arcade games that were available. So he asked if I had any, and I was like, yeah, I've got this thing I've been working on. Like, I need to kind of polish it up a little bit before it's in a good state to put in front of people, So I did that, and then in doing that, I kind of realized actually this is good. Yeah, there's something here, so I shouldn't really just leave it. I should probably release it. So I carried on working on it. And was kind of flipping between whether it was going to be a PC game or a mobile game, and was trying to sort of develop both side by side. And in the end, I think I scrapped the mobile version because it was giving me a lot of headaches. Like I'd never developed for Android before, and it was just like there's so much to try and learn here, and I was doing it, like midnight in my bedroom, like while my partner's trying to sleep, and like I was just getting really frustrated with it. So like, okay, I'm going to ditch the Android version at least for now. Just focus on the PC version, get it out on Steam, add all the bells and whistles that kind of make it shine on Steam, so like achievements, leaderboards, trading cards, all that kind of stuff. Just doubled down, got it finished, got it out, and that was it. I could like breathe a bit then and move on to other projects because it was an intense kind of few months. I remember working on that to get it done. But that was like a super valuable experience. Like obviously I'd worked on games in the past. By this point, I'd worked on 4 like major studio titles, and I'd seen them through to completion. But I'd never actually been the only person responsible for shipping a game for commercial purposes. So this was like a real big like learning experience, and jumping in at the deep end to make sure I could get it done and actually release it.
Yeah.
As far as like my inspirations go, like I said, it was kind of like mechanics first, and then what can I drape around that. So I was looking at old, like the kind of obvious classic like Space Invaders and Galaga and that kind of stuff. Just that really kind of bare bones pixel art aesthetic, and then that carried over into the arcade cabinet artwork as well. So I have I have this like illustrations on the sides of the screen, which were done by an old college friend, Paul Duffield, who's now a professional illustrator. So I got in contact with him again and asked if he would do these illustrations, which he did, and they look awesome. And I'm so glad
Yeah, they look
that he agreed to
fantastic.
do it.
They're so cool.
They are cool, aren't they? And they get a lot of comments, so I'm really pleased with how that turned out. So yeah, we were looking at like the old Space Invaders arcade cabinet artwork and using that for reference. And then the other big point of reference that I always bring up is well, first of all, people always ask me if it's like based on Downwell or if I was the creator of Downwell, and I always have to tell people no, because I think, as far as I remember, Downwell didn't even exist at the time, or at least like I wasn't particularly aware of it. But the one kind of other sort of touchstone which I do always bring up is Flappy Bird, um, because Flappy Bird is the same kind of like single button input or single tap input, and I really heavily used it as a model for like the rhythm, like the pacing of the game. Um, I I was really adamant that I didn't want to have these like really long sequences when you like fail and then have to go through a long animation to get back into the game again. It was like I loved how in Flappy Bird it's just like, oh, I screwed up, tap, restart, go again, and you're like straight back in. I thought that was just absolutely crucial for um, how compelling that game was and how much it made you just want to try and have another go and beat your last score. So that was a really influential game.
Yeah, I mean, I
Even
feel
though
like
they
that's amongst the most frustrating part of the game, but it's also like the biggest driving force for me.
right,
And I just looked up Downwell, and that came out in 2015. So
it was 15. Okay, so it came out before Switch and Shoot was finished, but it was after I kind of started and pinned down most of the design. So yeah, I think I can get away with that.
So, how long after did it take you to connect with Dan and wanted you to put it into an arcade cabinet after the release? How did you connect with him?
Yeah, that was another kind of big gap actually, because I'd gone off to so I finished the game and I went off to work on the next Oddworld game on Soulstorm, and um, I was busy doing that, and Dan reached out to me because he was starting up this company. He built a few arcade cabinets as kind of a hobby thing and like for friends and family, I think by this point, and he was looking to move into creating a business out of it and making some proper cabinets for indie games. So he was looking for indie games to build cabinets for, um, and he's told me him and his wife were like trawling through Steam looking for games that would be a good fit, and they came across Switch and Shoot. Um, and he tells me that it was just like it's perfect, perfect match. Which I agree. Like I'd never set out to make an arcade game, but it's a perfect fit, I think. So yeah, he got in touch with me, just said, "Do I want to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." Like I looked at the cabinets he built already; they look really cool. I was impressed with that. He showed me some designs for like the shapes of the cabinets and ideas for directions we could go in. There was a bit of back and forth as we sort of figured that out. Um, but yeah, I struggle to remember exactly when that was, but it was at least, I want to say it was at least a year or two after I released the game. Um, Must have been something like that. Yeah. Um, yeah. And then we kind of, we stay in regular contact and keep coming up with like, potential little ideas that we could do if we ever did another version or any changes, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Little tweaks as we go, because it's now in I think like six or seven arcades and bars across America. So every now and then there's like little tweaks that we need to make, or like something's not working for the particular setup in a particular location. So they ask for some changes. Like I think one place the the music on the title screen was a little too overbearing in the kind of particular setup they had. So we added an option to turn that off, and adding options to like change, like to tune the amount of credits you get for each quarter you put in and that kind of stuff. So like each venue can really have a bit more control over what they do. It's kind of evolving as it goes, I guess. So it's an
Very
ongoing process.
arcade specific tweaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
For the game itself, have you played the actual cabinet yet, or are you still waiting to do that?
No, I'm still waiting because I live in the UK and I haven't had a chance to get out there yet. I've never seen one in the flesh, which is really frustrating. And we were hoping, my wife and I were hoping at some point we'd be able to get out there, and then apparently there's this pandemic thing that's like means that we can't do that. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interrupting the world a little bit.
yeah, that's pretty annoying. But yeah, so no, never seen one in the flesh. But Dan did build me a like a mini cab. So because I take the game to various events around the UK, or at least I did before last year. I asked him if he could possibly build me like a smaller version that I could just stick in the back of my car, take to an event, put it on a tabletop, and just like plug my laptop into the back and have it running there. So he did, and that's about as close as I've got. But it's like a half height. Imagine if you just kind of took the control panel and just sliced everything below that off. So there's none of the coin.
The kind of thing you can throw like on a bar top, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then it's just got like a monitor in there on its side, so it's upright.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's as close as I've got, but it does have the one button setup, which was like a big part of what makes that arcade cabinet special. I think there's just like for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's basically just like you've got your screen, and then below the screen there's just like a black. You've got your regular black kind of panel where all your buttons would be, but there's just one big red glowing button in the middle because it's a one button game. Like everything is done with that one button. So that's like, to me, that's just like that's kind of a defining feature of the game, and certainly in the arcades. The fact that it's kind of there's only one button, it just raises so many questions if you don't know anything about the game. And like our hope was always that it would draw people in just through that alone. Like how do I, how does this even work? How do you play a game with one button?
I love the aesthetic of the one button. I know we spoke with Tony Hauber from Deathball a while back about I think it was Mario 64 and how they had only like with a 3-button combination there were like 64 or some crazy amount of like different things you could do with it. And it's the same in your game. I mean, you use one button, you're changing directions, you're picking up a power up, you're shooting, you're avoiding enemies, like you're navigating the screen. It's all happening at one time with one button.
Yeah.
So other than Switch and Shoot, what other games are you working on right now? Or what other projects have you worked on, I guess?
So since Switch and Shoot, I've released 2 other games. I released one called Ghost Grab 3000, which is another score chasing arcade game about a robot, like a tiny robot who's left after humanity's been wiped out by some unknown apocalypse. It's a little robot that's going around cleaning up the lost souls of humanity by grappling them all together with this grapple beam. So you're kind of weaving circles around ghosts and trying to tag them all in. And the more you tag at once, the higher score multiplier you get. It's just like a wave-based, score-based thing. You go as long as you can, grab upgrades as you go. So that was one of my games I did after Switch and Shoot. There's also another game called Singled Out, which is another arcade game, kind of like Guess Who with a sniper rifle. So like you're looking at a crowd of these weird alien creatures, and one of them is a galactic super criminal. And you're given 3 traits to use to identify them. So like they've got one big eye and like weird floppy ears and a big goofy grin. You've got to find the person in the crowd who matches that description and then take them out. But you only get 10 seconds to do it, so it's like super tense, super frantic. So those were my 2 release games. Those are both out on PC and Switch. And then right now I'm working on Dungeon Deathball, which is it's a turn-based tactical roguelike death sport, where you have a team of prisoners in a dungeon and they are pitted against a team of monsters, and they have to run this gauntlet to try and win a game of Deathball. No relation to the arcade game Deathball. Another accidental overlap. um, but yeah, if they survive this gauntlet, then they get to go free, and if not, they end up as bloody smushes on the floor. And yeah, that's it. I've done like a bunch of prototypes in the last few years as well. But those are the ones that really kind of like got some traction and made it to the finish line, or almost to the finish line.
Gotcha. So Dungeon Deathball is the only one that you're currently working on right now.
It is, yeah. It's in early access on Steam, and it's very nearly done. It's got like maybe a couple more months' work. Yeah, it's almost alpha, and that's my kind of current main project right now.
Gotcha. So, and along the line of developing, any tips you would have for new developers getting started?
Tips for new developers, I think like this is something that I think a lot of people say, but it's worth repeating, which is that you should really aim small. And when you think you're aiming small, you should probably aim even smaller because you're not aiming small enough. So like, it's really easy to get grand ideas in your head, or even what you don't think are grand ideas, but are actually will take a really long time to implement and a really long time to iterate on and get to a state that you're happy with. That whole process of making games, like it just takes such a long time, and there's so many hidden traps that you can fall into, of like, hitting bugs or like implementing something that doesn't work out exactly as you expected it to, and then you have to redesign it as you go, and now it's like there's a dozen other things hooked into it depending on it that also break when you change it. Like there's just so much that can go wrong, and um, the the experience of making a game and finishing it and releasing it is, as I said earlier, it's just a really valuable experience to have, which will make it easier to make your next game. So the sooner you can complete that loop of starting a project, getting it to finished, and releasing it, or maybe not even releasing it, but getting it into a state that you are happy to call done. That's like that should be your first goal, really, I think. And the smaller the game is, the quicker you can get to that point, and the better your next game will be, and the more informed you will be in all the decisions you make for your next game as well. So that's my top tip, I think, is just aim small, and then when you think you're aiming small, aim even smaller.
I think that's a really, really good advice. I mean, I think if I'm right, I believe it was Street Cleaner and Brooks that said something very similar. They were talking about how people start with such ambitious projects, and they need to just focus down on the core and get the core done. And if that's done, release it. But you can always add on later. Like, don't try
Sure.
and overwhelm yourself with a million things when you could just focus on 100.
Yeah, yeah. And also, actually, something else which really helped me, to actually get to that point, like something that's a bit more practical, I guess, is this idea of like putting rocks in a jar. Have you heard this analogy for for projects?
Maybe I don't know if I know exactly where you're going.
Okay, so this is some advice that I had a few years back, working on a project, and it really helps me like day to day managing my tasks. So imagine that, each task you do to finish your project is a rock, and you're putting the rocks into a jar, and the jar represents the time you've got to complete the project, right? So when that jar is full, you've run out of time. If you spend your time putting in tiny rocks, so like little bitty tasks that aren't that important, you will fill up the jar, and then you won't have any more space to put in the big stuff. So you'll run out of time and you haven't done the important things. If you start with the big ones, then you've got space to fill in the gaps with the little stuff. You need to make sure that you like hit those big, tick those big important boxes off first, and then like come back and do the smaller stuff when there's time. And by the way, there probably won't be time because stuff takes longer than you expect. Like you'll be surprised how much stuff you have to cut. So like make sure that the stuff you're cutting is the stuff that isn't that important, that you don't actually care that much about, and that isn't going to sell copies if that's your goal.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think that is really good. I've seen a similar analogy where they do like it's like golf balls, and then you fill it in with like smaller pebbles, and then there's
Right.
sand, and like it takes a lot to fill up this jar.
Yes.
And you're right. I mean, if you spend all your time on the little stuff, you get to the end and the game is polished, but the game isn't functional, and you're
Yeah.
missing
Yeah.
so many large components that make the game fun.
Exactly.
I find it really interesting to ask developers. I know you're working on a couple projects or a project right now, as to what indie games they're playing to kind of see what they like primarily. Because I mean, there are certain indie games that I absolutely love, and there are indie games that I'll play 3-4 times and then be kind of about them. But I'm kind of interested as to what games you focus on and what indie games you've been playing lately.
Yeah. What have I been playing lately? I've actually been playing a lot of retro games lately. I did play A Short Hike. I think I was listening to one of your recent episodes, and I think they forget who it was now, but I think they mentioned A Short Hike as well. But I played that last month and absolutely loved it. And it's a million miles away from the stuff that I'm making, but that was just a really great little experience. I've been playing a lot of Cave Noir. Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of that one. No.
It's an old, like traditional roguelike from '91. It was on the Game Boy, so it's not an indie game, but um, it's kind of closer to the kind of stuff that I like to make. It's a really streamlined little roguelike with this quest system where you can kind of dive into like um, instead of just having like one big randomly generated run of a game, you have like four smaller little quests, and it's like, okay, dive in and kill three monsters, and then you kill three monsters, and it's like, cool, you completed that quest, and you go back to the sort of main hub, and then you can dive in again. It's like, right, this time we want you to kill four monsters, or you can go and try this other quest, which is like find 5 gold or something like that, and then when you've done that, you can do find 6 gold, and each time it just gives you a little bit more to aim for and a little bit deeper into the dungeon you need to go. But like really early on, you get this sense of completion and satisfaction rather than like what most roguelikes have, which is when you first start playing, you just die loads and don't get very far at all for ages. Um, I really like that complete kind of flipping that on its head. What else have I been playing? What other roguelikes have I? Sorry, what other indie games have I been playing? Um, I cannot even remember. Mostly retro games right now.
That's what I've been hearing from a lot of people. I mean, I remember Martin was talking about that. The guy who created Gravitrex was saying, yeah, he's just playing like some old Atari games, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much good stuff, right? That like it goes under the radar and is full of like interesting things that could be learned and um, used in modern design. It's like, yeah,
Yeah, and
tons
I
of good
mean,
stuff.
there's just been so many games created at this point that when you're on the system and you're playing the games that are popular, the games that are hot, you overlook so many other games. Then you go back 5 years and you're like, wow, this is really something that I should have played and I want to try.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then like you quite often mention to someone that you never played it, and they're like, "What? How did you never play this game?" It's like, well, it's not that I wasn't playing anything. I was like playing games all the time. It's just
They
that,
only released like a couple thousand games for the console. Like, how could I have missed it, right?
right?
Awesome. Well, I guess to wrap everything up, I just want you to throw out your social media links so that everybody can find you and check out your games.
Yeah, so everything can be found on my website, which is just mattglanville.com. That's my name, MattGlanville.com. My Twitter is at Crowbar SKA, and all my other social stuff is the same handle pretty much. So like Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook. I have a Discord that I run, which you can find on my website as well, where people chat about game development and any old nonsense. I have a mailing list as well. I have a Patreon, and then I guess my Steam creator page is another big one to follow if you're interested in my games. But all of these are on my website, just mattglanville.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll throw all those links in the description too, so that anybody listening that wants to check it out can go check it out. I want to say thank you again, Matt, for coming on.
Awesome.
As well as if you guys like what we're doing here again, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. And if you are listening on the podcast and are interested in seeing gameplay for these games, they are on the YouTube channel with the interview again. We'll have the gameplay playing over it. So you can get a better idea of kind of what these games look like and feel like. Until next time,